Have you ever wondered what daily life would have been like for your ancestors? The routines and customs that shaped their world might seem utterly foreign to us today. I'm always fascinated by how practices that were once considered normal can completely vanish from society, sometimes within just a few generations. Welcome to today's exploration of strange traditions from history that no longer exist, customs that were once commonplace but have since disappeared into the footnotes of history books. These forgotten rituals tell us so much about human psychology, social evolution, and how drastically our cultural norms can shift over time. Some of these practices might shock you, others might amuse you, but all of them offer a window into worlds that once existed but are now gone forever. And trust me, by the end of this video, you'll have some fascinating historical knowledge that few people are aware of, perfect material for your next dinner party conversation. Let's begin with the tradition of professional mourners, a practice that stretched across diverse cultures from ancient Egypt to China, parts of Europe, and the Middle East. Imagine attending a funeral where people were paid to cry, wail, and publicly demonstrate grief. These weren't just casual leapers. Professional mourners were skilled performers who could create a powerful atmosphere of sorrow. The more important the deceased, the larger the troupe of mourners hired. In ancient Egypt, these mourners would throw dust on their heads, beat their chests, and create elaborate displays of anguish. The practice served several purposes. It demonstrated the social status of the deceased, as only the wealthy could afford numerous mourners. It also fulfilled the cultural expectation that death should be marked by overwhelming displays of grief, even when family members might be too shocked or composed to provide such displays themselves. Professional mourning began declining in Western societies during the Victorian era, when death became increasingly medicalized and funeral practices more regulated and somber. By the early 20th century, the tradition had largely disappeared from Western culture, though it persists in some regions today. Consider how different our modern, often subdued funeral practices are. We typically value authenticity of emotion rather than its theatrical display. Our discomfort with this historical practice reveals how our relationship with death and public expressions of grief has fundamentally changed. Another fascinating lost tradition is the use of arsenic as a beauty treatment in the Victorian era. Women would consume small amounts of arsenic or apply arsenic-based creams to achieve the coveted pale complexion that signified wealth and refinement. The logic was that arsenic caused blood vessels to constrict, creating a ghostly white appearance prized in an era when tan skin was associated with outdoor labor. Some women would take arsenic wafers or drink arsenic complexion water, slowly poisoning themselves in pursuit of beauty. The practice was so widespread that arsenic-laced products were openly advertised and sold. One popular product, called Dr. Campbell's Safe Arsenic Complexion Wafers, promised to remove freckles, pimples, and give users a beautiful complexion. The deadly side effects, including organ damage, cancer, and death from gradual poisoning, became increasingly evident as medical knowledge advanced. By the early 20th century, regulations began restricting arsenic in consumer products, and the practice gradually died out. When you consider the toxic beauty practices that concerned us just decades ago, like tanning beds or certain chemical peels, it puts our modern beauty debates in perspective. Before I continue with our next strange historical tradition, I want to take a moment to invite those of you enjoying this journey through history's forgotten customs to subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell. Each week, we explore fascinating aspects of human history that shaped our ancestors' lives, but rarely make it into conventional discussions. Your subscription helps support these deep dives into our collective past, and you'll never miss an upload when you activate notifications. Now, let's explore the once common practice of sending children away as sin-eaters. In parts of England, Scotland, and Wales from the Middle Ages until the early 20th century, sin-eaters were typically poor individuals who would be called when someone died. They would be brought before the courts, where they would be given bread and beer, sometimes placed directly on the chest of the deceased. By consuming this fury, they were believed to literally ingest the sins of the dead person, allowing the deceased to rest in peace while the sin-eater took on their moral burden. Sin-eaters were both essential to their communities and social outcasts. They performed a crucial spiritual service, but were considered unclean and dangerous due to the accumulated sins they carried. They often lived in isolation on the edges of towns and villages. Children from extremely poor families were sometimes sold or given to become apprentice sin-eaters when the kind sin-eater grew old, ensuring this spiritual service would continue. The practice began to fade in the 19th century as religious attitudes shifted and formal funeral services became more standardized. By the early 20th century, the last known professional sin-eaters had died, taking this strange tradition with them. The concept seems almost incomprehensible to our modern sensibilities. The idea of transferring moral stains through ritual consumption belongs to a worldview vastly different from ours. The fourth historical tradition worth exploring is the practice of bloodletting as mainstream medical treatment. For over 2,000 years, across virtually every civilization, medical practitioners believed that illness resulted from an imbalance of the four bodily humors: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. Bloodletting was used to treat everything from headaches and fevers to pneumonia and heart disease. Physicians would cut open a vein and drain blood into a bowl, sometimes removing several pints, bringing patients dangerously close to death. Alternative methods included applying meters, which became so popular in 19th century Europe that France was importing more than 40 million liters annually for medical purposes. Prominent historical figures who died shortly after aggressive bloodletting treatments include George Washington and Lord Byron. The practice began to decline in the late 19th century as medical science advanced and the germ theory of disease gained acceptance. By the early 20th century, bloodletting had largely been abandoned in mainstream medicine, though therapeutic phlebotomy still exists for specific conditions like hemochromatosis. When we consider that this practice was performed by the most educated doctors for thousands of years, it forces us to question what current medical practices might eventually be viewed with similar horror by future generations. The final historical tradition I'll share today is the practice of bundling or tarrying in colonial America. This courtship custom allowed unmarried couples to spend the night together in bed fully clothed, sometimes with a bundling board between them or with the young woman's legs sewn into a bundling sack. This took place with the full knowledge and approval of parents, usually during winter when fuel was precious and homes were cold. The practice was particularly common in New England and among certain European immigrant communities. It allowed young couples to speak intimately and get to know each other while theoretically preventing sexual contact. Parents would often be sleeping nearby, and the community's expectation was that virtue would be maintained. By the mid-19th century, bundling had largely disappeared from American life. Victorian sensibilities about propriety made the practice seem scandalous, and increasing prosperity meant separate parlors where courting could take place became more common. The tradition reflects a pragmatic approach to courtship that balanced the practical realities of colonial life with community standards of morality, a fascinating contrast to both the rigid chaperoning that followed in the Victorian era and our modern dating practices. These strange historical traditions remind us that practices that seem unquestionable in their time can become incomprehensible just a few generations later. These show us how malleable human society truly is, and how what we consider normal is constantly evolving. The customs we take for granted today may well seem bizarre or even horrifying to our descendants. I hope this journey through some of history's forgotten traditions has given you something to ponder. What aspects of our current society might disappear in the coming decades? Which of our common practices might future generations find strange or disturbing? If you enjoyed this exploration of history's forgotten customs, please hit the like button. It really helps the channel reach more curious minds. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Which of these historical traditions surprised you the most? Or do you know of other strange historical practices that have disappeared? Don't forget to check the description below for ways you can support the channel and help make more videos like this possible. Thanks for joining me on this historical journey. Until next time, keep questioning what we consider normal. History teaches us it's always subject to change.